Thank you so much for being here, and we're looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Payal. Let me welcome now our absolutely amazing speaker that I'm just dying to speak to and share some of her ideas and thoughts. Let me tell you, the most defining thing about her is her fearlessness and her decision to live and write on her own terms. Of course, you know that this is Tavleen Singh I'm referring to. So welcome, Tavleen. It's a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So, we are going to start with this book, Messiah Modi, where you have put at the end of it a question mark, which will lead me to my very first question. But I just want to say that it has a little subtitle, A Tale of Great Expectations. So I think many of us can identify with this tale of great expectations. This book was published this year.
Yes.
2020. How did you manage it? And HarperCollins, your publisher, in the midst of COVID?
No, it wasn't in the midst. It was just before. It was in February. I think it came out in the middle of February, and I did a couple of promotions, and I was going to come to you guys, and then COVID hit. So it was actually in February, but it was commissioned in 2018.
Right. So towards the end of the first term?
No, before that, sort of middle of the first term.
Okay.
Approximately after the first lynching.
So, are we going to remember our country's history and time by lynchings now?
But I said that only because it actually was after Muhammad Akhlaq was lynched. No, it was a year after. It was more. It was after.
Yes, 2017 was Akhlaq.
Second, sorry, I'm horrible. I'm beginning to sound like I'm defining India by lynchings. I'm not. It was after I'd gone back to the village of Muhammad Akhlaq and written a piece in the Indian Express that HarperCollins asked if I would like to write a book. And I said, there's an election, coming up in less than a year. And should it be, they said we should do it before the election. And then I suggested that we do it to include the election. That's how this book happened.
So, when you started off, you were one of those major Delhi journalists who was very pro-Modi. You were quite an enthusiastic supporter. And this book actually captures the journey out of the pink rose-colored glasses and moving to being his somewhat of a dissenter. But when I saw the book and I saw that question mark after Messiah Modi, I wondered if you were still keeping the doorway open to going back to thinking that he was going to deliver on those expectations.
You see, don't forget that I've been very critical for many years. I've been a journalist for sort of 40 years now, and I've been very critical of the things that Congress did not do. For me, education, healthcare, it shames me that 70 years after independence, we're still talking about open defecation. We shouldn't be having this conversation. People should have proper houses to live in. So my reason for supporting him was really because I hoped that he would do the things that the Congress party had not done. Because until you do those, there's no point in thinking that India is going to go anywhere. Because ordinary Indians must have access to schools, roads, drinking water. And, one of the reasons why I supported him is because I thought he delivered quite well in Gujarat.
Right. So the thing that strikes me is that you referred to open defecation, and the only other Indian leader who you, as you write in your book as well, had discussed this was Mahatma Gandhi. Exactly. So it is truly surprising that there was this complete silence for so many decades from the Congress.
This is the greatest failures of the Congress has been in the social sector, healthcare. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Look at the state of our hospitals. Now, has Modi delivered so far? Only on Swachh Bharat, which I think was a very successful program. And I think that the new education policy shows signs of change. and that should be welcomed. So I'm actually still leaving the door open, because although he hasn't fully delivered, we also have to admit that he's had 6 years compared to 60.
60, yeah. So you mentioned two things just now in the this part of the conversation. You talked about his Swachh Bharat project, which went a program that has gone on very well, and you talked about the new education policy. So this brings me to how interestingly you have written about Param Iyer, who has been a key sort of executor of his ideas, you
Yeah.
know. And I think that's a lovely, lovely segment. And I want to mention this. This is a little unlike most political books. It has a very wonderful human feel to it. Like the time you describe him showing pictures of the double pit latrine, for instance, and you're having breakfast
and
together.
jumping into the pit and playing around with manure, as a Brahmin. Can you imagine?
Yes.
What he would have faced. Yeah, no, he was actually an inspiration. I mean, he was the inspiration for this program, and it did very, very well. It still had, you can see signs of it. People like to say that not everybody is using the toilets and all that, but at least we're having that conversation. At least people I live in a little village in Maharashtra at the moment, and I used to get out onto the beach, and there would be a long row of women doing their morning ablutions, and they're not there anymore. And everyone in the village now has toilets. So, from my own experience, I see how successful that has been.
It seems that the women are driving this change really, because it is so unsafe for them to be using in the dark. That was the only time allowed to them. Actually,
Yeah.
this was a very, very significant thing. The other very interesting chapter that I thoroughly enjoyed reading was chapter 3, I think it is, where you meet the new HRD minister who you had known earlier. That was the then HRD minister.
When she was an actress. When she was an actress. When she was a 2-bit actress in Bombay. Huh? Yeah, I did for a bit then. Yeah. Huh.
And I love the little remarks about how the saris change as she moves into the textile department. She gets into it's a very human kind of a book. It's not just hardcore politics and figures and analysis.
I'm happy that you find it that way, because to me, I've always believed that it is books that tell you the human story that actually bring history alive. So, for instance, Hope Against Hope, which is actually the title that I borrowed from Nadezhda Mandelstam. She was married to Osip Mandelstam, that the poet in Russia, who in the Soviet Union, who Stalin jailed and ruined. And her book tells you more about Stalin's time than any of the history books do. Similarly, there's a book on Hitler. It's called Defying Hitler by Hafner. Sebastian Hafner. It tells you much more about what was going on in Germany in the 30s, because it tells you the story of the people of that time. And what is history? It's about the stories of people. So I always make it a point, I'm not a big political theorist. I have political views, but I really believe in the end we're dealing with human beings, and it is the humans that we should describe. And also, I really like to if she's wearing a red sari when she met me, I like to put that all in so that you know what it looked like.
So it seems you take copious notes or write a diary every day, and so it's easy. That's quite remarkable. That's where the blend happens. The sharp mind gets the facts in, and the diary gets all these lovely touches in.
Yeah, and I'm ready to write a column. You see, I do 2 weekly columns, and I sort of then know what happened that week, and then I check my notes. But I do have a journal. I've kept one for many years.
It's quite a remarkable habit. I'm afraid nowadays fewer people are doing that. Even on the comp, they are not keeping any notes. Anyway, let's go back to stories. One of the best stories that has really made an impact, the story to be told in India, is of the humble origins of the Prime Minister. It was a story so well told that we forgot that there were many other prime ministers who also came from humble origins, and no one remembers their story. So how much of milking has happened on this humble origins story?
you know, I wouldn't put it as milking. Those people who came from humble backgrounds before, like Dr. Manmohan Singh and Lal Bahadur Shastri, and
Yes.
the others really didn't. The others were quite sort of, most of them came from one family, as we know. But you see, at that point, there was a ruling class to which people like you and I belong. And we controlled everything, you know, we controlled the army, the generals came from our class, everybody came from the journalists, everyone came from our class. So the guys who came from humble backgrounds weren't proud of their humble backgrounds. They wanted to be seen as people who could fit in, who could speak English and, you know, and blend in with the ruling class. Modi has chucked the ruling class under the truck, right? So the old establishment has gone. The journalists that are important today are those who speak Hindi. I myself write in Hindi because, you know, it is much more influential to write in Hindi than in English.
Yes.
You know, I hope this book comes out in Hindi. It will be much better read. So basically, he used it as a badge of honor. And then there was Mani Shankar Iyer, you know, who helped him so much that he should actually pay him a pension now that he's an old man. But Mani Shankar Iyer, calling him a chai wala, really gave him that badge of honor. So, you know, I mean, actually, they haven't been able to trace the chai stall or the station.
I know, and there is some story with dates not fitting in and things like that.
There
Yeah.
is.
So I think there needs to be some little deeper research on that. We may be in for some other nuances as well. Anyway, so around the time that Mr. Modi, actually after Mr. Modi came in, we had um, Piles already referred to the largest and oldest democracy in the world kind of a thing. We are going to have an election coming in. But when Trump came in, to similar kind of things, you know, he dismissed the Lutyens gang, the Khan Market gang, and all the rest. Can you hear me? Because I get
I
a little
can.
thing that's saying
You're
my connection may be unstable. Okay, unstable, sorry.
where I am.
But I think that a different kind of swamp has got created. We haven't really gotten to any kind of lush, green, verdant gardens, soft grass growing under our feet. We just are back in a different kind of a swamp.
Yeah,
Do you feel that?
yeah, absolutely. You're completely right about that. And that's one of my disappointments. You know, I really think that it's wrong for Indian taxpayers and the poor people of India who pay indirect tax and who barely have a roof over their head. They dream of having a roof over their heads to pay for our elected officials and the unelected ones to live in Lutyens' Delhi, you know, to live like the British did, like colonial masters.
Yeah,
And I
in
was hoping,
acres and acres.
yeah, I was hoping 1 acre, as you probably know as well as I do, since we both come from Delhi, 1 acre of land in Lutyens' Delhi is 150 crore rupees, is worth that much. And they live on 5 and 6 acres. The prime minister, I think, now lives on 10. But even if you had, you know, I was hoping he'd move back into Teen Murti House to make the point that there should be a permanent prime ministerial residence. And that, you know, the president has his house. And actually, you could build houses on Rashtrapati Bhavan, 600 acres for ministers. But we're paying for MPs to live like princes. And I remember asking Arun Jaitley why he hadn't made this change. And he said, we'll do it in our second term. And now we have a second term in which he's remodeling the central vista, you know, and building
So I
more.
was actually going to come to that. I was going to come to that. I wonder if you remember that there was talk in Sheila Dikshit's last years of Delhi going in for a World Heritage Site status, a city status, you know, and just about a week or a fortnight before the recognition was to come in, the project was pulled out from UNESCO. And everybody started talking immediately of this Central Vista renewal project. I don't think there is really any need for a Central Vista renewal. We may just be playing with the we may just be indulging further the new power brokers in the country.
I think it's shocking what they're doing. I'm appalled at what they're doing, because in fact, we don't need more ministerial offices. We need less. The Lok Sabha is a wonderful building, which was actually modeled by, I think it was Baker and not Lutyens, on the Chauset Yogini temple. So it's an adaptation of Indian architecture. The sandstone that is used is the stone of Delhi, is what they were using. So
quartzite.
If you want to do anything on the Central Vista, knock down those ugly ministerial buildings and bring in museums and restaurants and cultural stuff. And so that people will think of that as the heart of Delhi. They're doing the opposite. He's putting his own house on the Central Vista. There's going to be, I think it's vandalism.
It's at a time also, and that is what makes it look even as a poorer choice, at a time when the economy is at the lowest it has ever been.
Yes.
And,
yes.
We have the minister saying act of God and washing her hands off it, which is so wrong, absolutely. Let's talk back to what his promise was. He comes in citing some wonderful words, and you have really put it beautifully when you say that he changed the script in a way. He was not talking poverty alleviation. He was talking how poverty was the enemy of the Indian people, and he was talking prosperity. This was the first time from Garibi Hatao, it was prosperity.
Yeah.
What went wrong? Would you like to put your finger on exactly what went wrong, or maybe even when it went wrong?
I have in the book. I've said that he was new to Delhi and the ways of Delhi. And when Rahul Gandhi taunted him about Soot Putti Sarkar, he should have actually said, do you feel that you're the only one who should be wearing suits and boots? Every Indian should be able to do it. And instead of that, he actually then backtracked. He backtracked on all the things that he had promised and went back to just running the welfare schemes already started by the Congress Party. He improved them. And that's one of the reasons why he won. I actually think that there are two reasons why he won.
Second time.
The last year's election.
Yes.
One was that those welfare schemes were less corrupt. There were no scandals in Delhi of the kind we'd seen. And there was, when I traveled, I met people who would say, Desh ki izzat rakhi hai duniya mein. Now, I think that is because, Dr. Manmohan Singh was really not, he was de facto prime minister, but he answered to Sonia Gandhi. He wasn't really elected by the people. And so I think that they felt that, that he was received as a man of greater stature. And Indians like that, because we've been colonized and all that sort of stuff. So I actually don't think Hindutva played a role in his second victory. Now, of course, everything's changed.
You've given me so many points to take off from, and I'm wondering where I should take off from. But since you mentioned Hindutva, you have very smartly described the difference between Hinduism and Sanatan Dharma, and how Hinduism is sort of limiting, whereas Sanatan Dharma is open, and they use the word Sanatan Dharma in their conversations, the RSS, and you've talked a lot and given a lot of importance to Ram Madhava, I must say. Is there because you see a potential of a future role for him that is much more important than what he's playing right now?
I'm actually disappointed that they haven't given him a better role, because he's one of the few people left, now that Arun is gone, who actually reads books and, and understands history and everything. He's a very intelligent man. But, I am one of those people who I don't really believe in God, even though I was born as a Sikh. But I really believe that if I was promoting a modern idea of religion, I would promote the idea of the Sanatan Dharma, which means that everyone has a right to worship the way they want to. That's why the Sanatan Dharma. So, if you feel that you're happy being a Muslim, well, let's allow that. Please go ahead. They had a problem with Islam and Christianity, but they dealt with it. You know, they dealt with the fact that the Muslims think of, you know, everyone goes to hell except them. And the Christians think the same thing. But they somehow managed the Sanatan Dharma with such a profound idea of
This
religion.
is in some old age, not now.
Not the version. These guys are turning it into a Hindu version of Islam, which is about the stupidest thing they can do. You know,
Yes.
I mean, what defined India was this India's conquests were not military conquests, but of the mind. You know, all of Southeast Asia was captured by Indian civilization because of our conquests of the mind, and they've reduced it now to something that it never was, and I hope will not be in the future.
You mentioned Southeast Asia. Did you mention Southeast Asia or South Asia? But Southeast Asia, I remember watching the Ramayana play out with every actor in Indonesia being Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, so yes, we had a tremendous soft power influence in the world that we neglected maybe in our early diplomatic forays, where we looked to the West rather than the East, where we should have looked a little more. And unfortunately, I feel that many of the Muslim nations of the world are now taking a very strident attitude against India. You know, this whole Tejasvi Surya incident.
Well, you know, I mean, to tell you the truth, the Muslims also need to pull their socks up, okay? Because, you know, there are...
You were fearless. I told you.
No, you know, you see this idea. I'm actually very, I've known Arif Muhammad Khan, who's now the governor of Kerala, for a very long time. And he said something very interesting to me just yesterday. He said the Muslims have an overdeveloped sense of victimhood, the Indian Muslims, and a sense of superiority as well, because they feel, oh, you know, we've ruled. So, you know, every little Muslim thinks, it has that combination. One, oh, they're destroying us. And two, you know, our religion is superior. We don't believe in idol worship. And we brought, and, you know, this idea that they've had, the Indian Muslim, in which you still see, you know, written on mazars, there was darkness here till Islam came. Now, you know, that is really not on. And it's time to stop talking that way and to accept that you really have a life in India, even now, despite 1 year of Hindutva, where you're better off, more accepted, more allowed to worship the way you want to than any other country, you know? And that's something Muslims should accept.
I would like to show you another side of it. The sense of victimhood. Hindu khatre mein hai. And you're 80% of the population.
I know, it's true.
You know, so it's actually a clash of two insecure sets.
No, because
where numbers go in favor of the Hindus, and hence we are dealing with minorities.
This has only started now. This is these guys who are really turning Hinduism into a kind of shabby version of Islam, you know, and what they're doing is a great wrong.
So the Hindu Rashtra that they are talking about building now is a strange Hinduism that we have never lived through. It's a standardization, and an unfair standardization. Hinduism deserves, Sanatan Dharma Hinduism deserves far better treatment and framing than they are doing. It's also caste oriented. So as you have said in it, yes, lynchings were anti-Muslim, but the Dalits were collateral damage.
Yeah. Because you see, only two communities work with meat and leather. The Muslims, who do the cutting of the animal, because we don't have the meat factories, which we should have, because there's no reason why we shouldn't. And it's the Dalits who, unfortunately, to this day, do the skinning of the dead animal. So they all lost their jobs, you know, I mean, you see the ugliest aspect of all this in Yogi Adityanath's Uttar Pradesh. And to me, actually, as I mentioned in the book, one of the things that really began my disenchantment with Modi, when I began to lose hope, was when he appointed Yogi Adityanath as chief minister of UP. He didn't win the election. You know, I mean, he was just appointed. And look what's going on in UP, you know?
Right.
The the targeting of Muslims and Dalits is horrendous at the moment in UP.
Yes. You mentioned something about why don't we have the meat factories and all that. But you know that we were the second largest meat exporter in the world after Brazil. Apne pair pe humne khud kuladi mari, kind of a thing, with all this chaos that has got today. Cattle fairs, which were very well known, and we know the Pushkar fair and we know Sonpur ka Mela and all that, they have shriveled up because nobody wants to transport cattle anywhere from one place to another.
And by the way, I hope I don't get lynched for saying this, but if you actually read the Ramayana, and the night that Ram goes into the forest, and I think it's Maharishi Vyas, or who's the one who has a party for him, and they describe the different kinds of game that he's eating, and there's maybe beef was not eaten, but every other kind of meat was eaten. So, in ancient India, there was no vegetarianism. It's something that I think has come about in more recent times.
In fact, even today, vegetarianism is a very small sliver of India's large population. It's an influential one, or let's say those who are upholding power today in the country come from that class. Yes. So the point I wanted to make is that there used to be an elite class earlier, which you said we all came from. We spoke English, the generals, the journalists, everybody was from. But today also there is a very strong class and caste bias in India. It's just a different one.
But, let's be fair to the RSS, whose version of Hindutva Modi has grown up with. They are not for caste. I mean, they don't actually want the caste divisions because they want a Hindu monolith. So they don't appreciate these divisions. It's another matter that Dalits who've joined the RSS have written books afterwards saying they wouldn't eat from their hands. And it's another matter that the Satsang Chalak is always a Brahmin, except for one time when Raju Bhaiya was. But the fact is that they don't want these divisions. Their problem is Islam. They want Hindus to think of themselves as brave and as superior to the Muslims. So they've got kind of twisted Hinduism which they're promoting.
So there is a definite link, as the recent address by I think he's the former economic advisor to the World Bank, the Columbia professor, who said that India's economy is slipping because of a divisive society,
Yeah, well, that guy's a Marxist, okay, Stiglitz. Don't go by what he says. We can't take him seriously. It's the Indian economy is slipping, is collapsing because of Modi not having understood the importance of allowing the economy to flourish. There are regulators, there have been so many regulations after he became Prime Minister that he's actually brought back a kind of Inspector Raj. The license Raj ended, the Indian economy boomed. This whole middle class that is now in charge, 300 million people brought out of poverty at that point in the 90s, when we had respite from the dynasty. That's so I actually hoped that he would do the same, that he would let private enterprise flourish, that he would encourage people to move away from state controls and, instead of just government jobs. And he didn't do any of that. So the economy was in trouble before, the Chinese virus. It was already in trouble,
Earlier I asked you to put your finger on a moment in time. I ask you again, could that be demonetization?
Yes.
Or could it be GST? Or is it COVID?
No, I think that with demonetization, what he showed was that he didn't understand the kind of reforms that India needed, right? And what he also didn't seem to understand then was that the people that would be most hit were those who worked in the unorganized sector, which is 80% of the economy, right? So, he caused extraordinary damage. for which we continued to pay for the past 3 years before or 4 years before COVID. And now there's COVID. And, what proves that he didn't understand what was going on really was the fact that he didn't realize that migrant workers would be going back to their homes because they would lose their jobs,
Yes.
So he seems to be very out of touch with what needs to be done.
So I agree with you that he seems to be out of touch, but there is something else that I'd like to flag at this point, which is the world watched. It was the largest migration ever, so many people walking in such pathetic conditions, and they were all our people.
Absolutely.
We did not get any compassion from the Prime Minister. I find that strange to explain.
But, let's go back to the title of the book, Messiah Modi with a question mark. And I think in the book as well, and certainly in my columns, I've said, India doesn't need a Messiah. It needs a leader. And I've noticed that since the COVID, since COVID,
Pandemic.
yeah, he's become more distant and messianic almost. And it hasn't reduced his popularity, but he's certainly, he's only been out of PM House 3 times, I think, or 4 times in the past year. I mean, what is it, since March, right? Once to open the temple, once to inspect floods, and the other day with the tunnel, where he was, where everyone had been trolled for waving, to nobody, right? So I'm beginning to get a little bit worried that he has begun to see himself as a Messiah. And that really is not good. Politicians are just politicians and must be treated that way. We don't need messiahs.
So one other quality about him that you have written about in the book, which is also disturbing and very strange, is the fact that he has no friends.
Yes, that always worried me because, I actually didn't know him very well before. I mean, I knew him a bit because he was in Delhi as a BJP spokesman. And the first time...
you've written how you were friends with Govindacharya, with whom he shared a room.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'd see him.
Yeah, and I hardly knew him at all. But I was summoned for, after I wrote this thing saying that Latin's Delhi was shaking in its shoes because, he was going to arrive. But I've lost the thread of the question. What was your question?
My question was about him being friendless,
Yes.
and that it disturbed you.
Yeah, because then I started to examine his life.
He called you for this interview.
Yes.
He summoned you.
I began to know him then after that, right? Which was just about a year before he became Prime Minister. After he became Prime Minister, I began to observe him very closely. And I noticed that there's one journalist I know who said to me, and he knows him better than anybody else. He said he doesn't have friends. There's no one he can pick up at 3 a.m. and say, he doesn't have any friends. Arun Jaitley, I think, came closest to being a friend, because a friend has to be an equal, not someone who you consider lower than you. And that is worrying. That is worrying. And I think compassion comes from love and friendship. And, if you love your friends and your family, that's where compassion comes from.
Well, he seems to be very fond of his mother. He breaks into tears. That entire success and the vision of the Ujjwala program was apparently emanated from his mother's suffering in his youth that he saw.
But he's not close to the other members of his family. We don't see them, and who are his friends? You can't.
What about Mr. Amit Shah?
Amit Shah, I think, is his Sancho Panza. I mean, he's his. I don't want to say it in a bad way, but I don't think that we can call that a friendship.
He wins the elections, keeps him in power.
No, I don't think that's true. Modi wins the election. I think that if you took Modi out of the BJP,
out of the equation,
and let Amit Shah lead the campaign, there is no guarantee at all that the BJP would get a full majority. Modi has won both elections. There's no question about that.
We have a few minutes left, and I would like to take you now a little bit to not just the now, here and now, but also a little projection towards the future. In the here and now, what is with Mr. Modi that he's not being able to take control of the economic downslide, that he's left it in hands that are not being able to handle it? Is it that BJP lacks talent that can rise to the occasion, or has he just given up knowing that you just have to wait this one through?
I think that he has some very talented economists with him who could tell him what to do, but I think they're too afraid to tell him what to do. I think that he's very hands-on with the economy. And in my view, he really, you have to be an economist. And if you're going to be a political leader, you must get ideas from everybody on what to do. For instance, you may not like Donald Trump, but he certainly made a difference to the American economy.
Yes.
Whereas we haven't seen that happen in India, because it's this kind of voodoo economics that comes out of Nagpur, that really isn't based on proper economic ideas. And the economists around him, I think, are too scared to tell him what to do.
What is next? Will he prefer course correction? Will he go back to old ideas that have worked in the past, including some strident form of Hindutva when it comes to the next election? Because while it may seem very far away right now, every day is bringing us a little closer.
It's always a mistake to predict what's going to happen, 4 years from now in an election. But in the year that, in his second term, from the day that it began almost, we've seen that they've a very aggressive kind of Hindutva agenda, where our only Muslim majority state, they got rid of the special status for it, which, and what is the second step in Kashmir? What I see as his biggest flaw is that he doesn't seem to think of the second step. So, you get demonetization, and then he doesn't realize that whether it's going to work. They didn't even have the machines, the ATM machines for the new notes, insufficient quantities, right? Then you have...
the notes didn't fit the slots in the ATM machine.
What I'm saying.
That was really crazy.
In this term, we've seen Kashmir. The terrorism hasn't come down. You've turned it into a union territory. For what? You've alienated people who were already alienated. Then you have the other example that I can think of is the first lockdown. When COVID started, when we were doing talis and thalis and
diyas and all that, yeah.
And it was so severe that it affected, again, the most vulnerable of our citizens, right? And he seems not to have planned for that. So that's what worries me, is that I think that he might now, because we're really, the economy has tanked. There's been, I've forgotten what the figure is, but so many jobs lost, etc. But to revive it, he's going to need to really have a plan, which says, this is what we will do here, this is what we will do there, this is how much. We haven't even had that fiscal infusion, that for instance, in America, what have they done? People who lost their jobs, they got $1,500 a month for a certain period. Yes. Here we're just distributing grain, and it's worrying.
Yes. The infusion that you are talking about could have also come from overseas, but it did not come because, again, the whole thing hadn't been thought through. So the tax was so high that nobody wanted to invest in India. The ease of business was just touted, was words that were being said. And we had so many opportunities which we lost. We never pursued. The aluminium factory, aluminium place of Vedanta was an example of that sort. So
don't forget that that factory could have been made Orissa the center of aluminium production. Sonia Gandhi and Rahul closed it down. Lavasa, which, as you know, I have a personal connection with, would have been the first planned city in India. Sonia Gandhi closed it down. But Modi could have revived those things instead of letting it slide.
We have Chiranjit Banerjee, who said Hindus are 80% all right, but the VHP and RSS combined constitutes barely 5%. How do you expect forward-thinking leadership to emerge from such a narrow talent pool, since this regime rarely chooses leaders outside of this cohort?
I don't think that's true. In the cabinet, there are people who've come from the RSS, but there are people who have nothing to do with the RSS. So, and frankly, the VHP has no representative, as far as I can see, in the cabinet. It's not the people that we need. What we need is for the great Sanatan Dharma idea of Hinduism, to be promoted, not this narrow one.
Right. Naveen Sardana says, you started by saying that Modi had done nothing in the education and health sectors. Look at it from a bipartisan view. Isn't the center just a facilitator? And these subjects are on the concurrent list. So actually it's the states which are responsible for both these subjects. So why do we always blame the center for these ills?
We're not, but the BJP had 17 governments in the states. In 2014, between 2014 and I think the 2017, and they controlled major states. Why did we not see schools improve in the BJP states? Why did we not see hospitals improve in the BJP states? And there is an education ministry in Delhi which has a purpose. It makes a bigger policy which can be accepted or rejected by state governments. But there is an education ministry and a health ministry. So, but why do the BJP states not improve?
Right. Of course, the numbers have gone down now for the BJP states. Yeah. So,
have you seen
now
improvement?
Somebody's asked you this.
In UP?
No, as a matter of fact, UP is something else, Badlands, really. Okay, here's a question, which is quite sweet. When you met Narendra Modi for the first time, what, if anything, surprised you about him? This is a question from Anil.
The first time I met him, I didn't even notice him, I have to say, because I'd gone to see Govinda Acharya. Then after the 2002, violence in Gujarat, I went to actually do an interview with him after traveling around the riot-hit areas. And I was standing in the doorway, and he didn't even invite me in. And he said, you knew me from Delhi? So I said, yes. And he said, how could you imagine that I would have organized this violence? And that was it. I had to leave. So it was only the third time that I got to talk to him.
Avanti has asked, Avanti Pandey, do you see any similarities between Modi and Trump?
Yes. They are both outsiders in a sense to an establishment. Washington, they call it the swamp. And really, Lutyens' Delhi was the same. It was the swamp. And they're both populists. They win on their own, charm or their own whatever. So they're both populists, and they've come in from the outside into the swamp.
Well, one wears a mask and one doesn't. That's one big difference.
This is true. This is indeed true. But I think that he's starting to wear a mask now a little more, Trump.
I hope so, for the sake of others, if not himself. Yeah. So I have this question, which is a little long, and let me see if I can make sense. Otherwise, when you say the RSS doesn't want the caste system because they want a Hindu monolith, how are the two things the same? The monolith is for those outside Hinduism. Caste is the invisible plinth of the Hindu order. what has the RSS done to demolish this caste order? So you did, this is from Renu Bhalla. You did mention that they've taken on more people.
A lot of Dalits tickets. They've won a lot of Dalit votes. And the RSS ostensibly does not believe, I mean, it makes no difference, but I've read books from ex-RSS Dalit people who claim that they see discrimination all the way up. And, you know, why don't we ever see a Dalit Sarsanchalik? You know, when you see that, when you see the head of the RSS coming from the Dalits, then you'll know that they mean what they say.
Is the situation as pessimistic about Modi? We don't have any choice, is a question.
This is absolutely true. So, you know, let's hope that he does, that the question mark in the title of this book is that, you know, maybe he's not a messiah, but let him just emerge to pull the economy up and to take India forward, because, you know, I mean, I would really like to see that happen in my lifetime.
How did you ignore the fact that Modi is an ideological being in 2014?
I didn't ignore that fact. I knew what had happened in Gujarat, and I knew that the RSS was his alma mater, but I felt that he was wrongly targeted as being the only chief minister who'd presided over violence. I'm a Sikh. I was in Delhi in 1984, and I saw a prime minister justify the murder of 3,000 Sikhs by Congress party workers. So I didn't think of secularism and ideological stuff as important.
How do you respond to your critics when they say that you criticize Modi now, I guess, because your son's OCI got suspended and you think it has something to do with the Modi government?
I write very fast, but I could not have written a book in 5 weeks. Okay, so the book was written long before Atish's OCI was cancelled and blah, blah. And the criticism of Modi, if you read my columns, begins with with demonetization, and then Yogi Adityanath and the lynchings. I criticized all of that for the past 5 years. Read my column as well as the book. Go and buy the book now.
So my last question, which I said I wanted to ask you, is that people have already started saying after Modi, who? And the name that we hear is somebody we've already discussed in our conversation today, Yogi. If Mr. Modi stayed silent, Mr. Yogi speaks a very violent language. So are we going from bad to worse? From a little bit of hope to hopelessness? What do you foresee?
Well, for a start, Yogi has not won Uttar Pradesh. He was appointed after the election was won. So if Yogi Adityanath manages to win Uttar Pradesh, and if he manages to create, a huge following across the country, well, bad luck for India and good luck for him. But I don't see that happening because, there's South India, I think that he's very much a local leader and has remained a local leader and is being promoted by some kind of new, Naya Hindus, as they say, Naya Musliman, who are very stupid people and who basically have tried to fill up the slots of the courtiers in, Modi doesn't have a court, but they're his courtiers who are talking this kind of language.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.